before we get started, do you have any questions about the last class or the last few classes that we've done? This is number 3 of the Introduction to Vedic Astrology. Does anyone have any questions that you'd like to ask before we dive in? And you can feel free to unmute yourself to ask, or if you're shy, you can ask via chat. Okay. So, all right, well, let's take a look then here. All right, so then we'll get started. So one thing we talked about yesterday in the last class was how even using beginning techniques, you can begin to give yourself and your clients a little bit of information. For example, if we talked about there are any 2 or 3 of Saturn, Mars, Sun, Rahu, or Ketu, any 2 or 3 of those in a certain house, it can create trauma or surgery to that part of the body. And how do you tell that to a person? Well, they probably already know it if they're, middle-aged or onwards. But it does help to validate the fact that, hey, this didn't happen by accident. Your life is on purpose. There is meaning in your life. We also talked about, well, let me not delve on that. We'll just get into today's class. So today, I want to introduce you guys to the subcharts, because in Winning with Vedic Astrology, I am going to be using the Navamsha, the main subchart. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and how we use the Navamsha. But first of all, let's just start with a general sort of introduction here. So some of the cons of Jyotisha is that, and part of the reason that Indians from India are not doing Jyotisha, young men and women, is that it takes a long time to become good at it. I mean, if you go to school for 12 years and study Jyotisha, you will still wake up and there will be days when you look at a chart and go, I have no idea what's going on here. You'll grab your head with both hands and go, what? I don't get this. Whereas if you study anything like medicine or law or architecture, 12 years, you're going to be an architect, you're going to be a doctor, and you'll be making money, you'll have security in life. And even if you don't know what you're doing, there's still a structure there to support you. Whereas Jyotisha doesn't quite have that structure, right? So that's one of the cons, is that it can take a lifetime or more to learn. In fact, a little story that one of the students of Mantriji gave was a story about Mantriji, how he came to the West to find his student. He was directed to come to the West, to Canada, to Toronto specifically, to find his true student. And he spent quite a bit of time here in the Indian community there in Toronto, and looking, and he found young kids, smart, bright, but they didn't want to learn Jyotish. They wanted to be, like I said, doctors, lawyers, successful people, because they were bright, intelligent, and who wouldn't want that? And ultimately, long story short, it was a Westerner, a young, hungry Westerner heart who met him, and the connection was there, and he became his lifelong student. And so, whether you're fair-skinned, dark-skinned, you're from South Africa or North Dakota, doesn't matter. It matters where your soul is from. And Mantriji, when we sat in satsang, he would kind of hold his hands to his forehead and go, it's amazing to see all these different faces, Canadian face, American face, Jamaican face, but all their souls are from India. And then he'd laugh. So the point is, Jyotisha, if you're drawn to the study of this science, then it's, you have a connection to it that's beyond maybe even this lifetime, that goes beyond logic. So, but one of the cons is that it can take a while to learn. The pros are certainly abundant as well. And among the pros is that with very simple methods, you can get a deep insight into a person's life. You have Saturn in your first house. Oh, life for you begins after 40. Why? Well, Saturn is the planet of time, of delay, of old age. Less bold when young and often colder, he grows younger, growing older. This is from a book of poetry I wrote about the planets and the houses. But the point is, you have an immediate snapshot of the person, that they will reach maturity later in life, that their great years begin after 40. Why? Because Saturn also matures Saturn matures at 36, but really after 40 is when you start seeing the results. So that's a very simple snapshot. A person may be running a period of Rahu. Well, then you can bet that their life is going to be punctuated by what I call sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the wild ride of Rahu, the outsider period. So here are just some very simple kind of examples of how a quick snapshot of a chart can give you a decent insights into a chart. And I have a question here. Where can we get your book of poetry about the planets? Well, it is unpublished because, like any Saturn-ruled poet, I don't think it's good enough yet. If I were inspired by I myself have Saturn in the ascendant, so I know whereof I speak. If I were inspired by a different planet, say Jupiter or the Sun, I might have the confidence to say, here, world, here's my poetry. Now read it. Everyone must read it. But alas, it is still in my desk drawer. So one day, yes, I will publish that. And it's a long, long book of verses for the houses of the chart and the planets. But maybe I can do a private viewing or reading when we see each other, Kumar, in Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. And those of you who are interested in astrology, I'll give a little free plug here, unabashed plug for Arsha Vidya, which is an ashram in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, which is one of the few places in one of the few ashrams, institutions, at least that I know of around the world, that still does things the old way, which is typically offering teachings for people who truly want to learn for free. You go there, you do some seva, and you can study for free. And compare that to the sort of California method of pay $10,000 for this thing or $5,000 for this mantra. It's quite a refreshing attitude. So anyone who is interested in real Vedic Vedanta and Vedic scripture and teaching, Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, ARSHAVIDYA, arshavidya.org. That's their website, or avg.org, I believe. Anyway, so I'll be there this summer, contributing a little bit in June to a Jyotish Kumbh Mela. So you can join us there if you like, June 2nd through the 14th. Anyway, point is that using simple techniques, you can get an insight into a person's chart. If someone is running Mars-Saturn or Saturn-Mars, well, regardless of where those planets are in their horoscope, if you run the period, the planetary period of two planets that are, on the one hand, malefics, on the other hand, they're enemies to each other, so they'll likely not want to get along, then those themes of enmity, tension will predominate in your life during that period. So Saturn rules the brakes, Mars rules the gas. What happens when you press both in your car? You get a lot of friction. And so not so hard to predict those kinds of results when a person runs that period. Or if a person runs Saturn, Rahu, another two malefic planets. And this is why we learn the difference between malefics and benefics. Additionally, Saturn and Rahu both happen to be Vata planets. So if you know a little bit of Ayurveda, you can ask the person, hey, have you been having nervous tics or joint pain? How's your lower back feeling? Oh my God, yeah, I've been having some tremors and I don't know what's happening. How did you know that from my chart? Well, you don't have to be an expert Jyotishi to say your Vata is high. Okay, so yeah, so this is a good question. Isn't Saturn neutral to Mars in Vedic? Yes, the Mars, fundamentally, they represent very opposite forces. Saturn is the force of conservative, dyed in the wool, no change. Mars is the force of breakthrough, freedom, needs to change. So archetypally, they represent opposing forces. Again, Saturn is the brakes, Mars is the gas. And when a person is ripped apart, who is ambivalent, has that ambivalence in their life where they want to go this way and that way, it can create frustration, regardless of where those planets are in the horoscope. So again, if you run K2, you're definitely going to wander around. Mr. Mantri used to say people during Ketu Dasha will always be on their legs, meaning always wandering around looking for something that they're not sure what they're looking for. It's an outsider period. You leave your comfortable structure to go to find something. And likewise, periods of benefic planets offer their own sort of predictable outcomes. And for those of you who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, let me just show you here in the chart. What I'm talking about when I say periods is what's called the Vimshotari Dasha. Vimshotari is a very fancy $50 word that simply means 120. Vimsha Uttara. Dasha. Dasha means planetary period. What it literally means is that thing that bites you in the butt. That portion of your karma that's biting you, because the root damsh means to bite. Or it's the portion of your karma, the buffet of your karma that you're about to bite into. And the enjoyment, of course, is up to you. So this period of 120 details the fact that according to Vedic astrology and Ayurveda, 120 years is probably the optimal lifespan of a human being. And if you live for 120 years, you will experience the planetary period of each one of the 9 planets. Each one of them has an unequal length. Moon is 10 years, Mars is 7 years, Rahu is 18, and so forth. And by the time you roll back to Moon, 120 years will have passed. You see, 2015, Moon starts. Next time Moon starts, 2135. So this is called the Dasha, the 120-year period. And that's how we time, one of the main ways we time things in Vedic astrology. So back to our presentation here. Right. So I'm not sure I want to go. Yeah. So we'll go into this. One of the basic things is that a planet will activate the houses they occupy during their periods. So here's another simple way to gain an insight into a chart. So if you're running a Jupiter period and it's in the 7th house of relationships, then relationships will come to the forefront in your life during that specific period. If it's in the first, then your health and identity. If it's in the eighth, then anything that is foreign, things like yoga. I began the study of Ayurveda when I ran Jupiter in my eighth house. And I know a lot of people have run begun similar studies when they ran a planet in their eighth house. Eighth house rules classical traditions. And it doesn't just have to be yoga and Ayurveda, it can even be something like ballet, which is a traditional mentor to student kind of art. Or, I don't know, traditional dance, traditional cooking, something. Eighth house rules secrets. Secrets passed down through teacher and disciple. Planets activate the Dharma type of the house they occupy. This is a presentation for another class on the Dharma type, so I won't go into that here. But any questions so far before we dive into what the main thrust of today is that I'd like to talk about is the subcharts. Any questions up to this point? Okay, so essentially a subchart, for those of you who are musicians, a subchart is like an octave of the main chart. So if you have a C note, and I'm not a singer, so I can't represent a C note to you, but if you have a C, ooh, that's a low, let's say that's a C, it's not a C. Then the higher octave of that is ooh, ooh, ooh. That high ooh is also a C note, but it's a higher octave of it. And similarly, the main chart is the base note of the person's life. So this is the main chart. You can say that it's the tree of the tree of life of the person. The subcharts represent, in a sense, some of the fruits one can expect from the tree. And the main subchart is the Navamsha, the D9, or the ninth division. And before we go into the Navamsha, I want to just show you what the other subcharts are. So the D3, which means dividing each sign into 3 pieces. The D3 represents siblings. Dividing each sign means Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. So imagine the sign Aries divided into 3 pieces. Then each one of those pieces is allotted a specific sign in and of itself. At this point, since this is a beginning class, I don't want to introduce how exactly we divide, but just knowing that it's a threefold division. And this relates to the third house, which is siblings, and also your own ability to fulfill your desire. It's courage, self-fulfillment. A person with a strong D3 can push until they break through, have breakthroughs in life, even if their main chart is weak. D4 has to do with land and property. The D7 has to do with children. The D9 is relationships, and we'll come back to this because it's also a lot more. The D10 is career. D12 is parents. D16 vehicles, and D24 is your education. And one of the ways you can know, this is just looking at a D24 in a chart that is accurate, because these subcharts become very sensitive to time differences. So if your birth time isn't exact, you wouldn't rely as much on these D charts. But if you have an exact birth time and you look at a child's D24, you can tell a lot about how that child's education will unfold. Unfortunately for me, I have a I mentioned I ran Jupiter. That Jupiter happens to be in the 8th house of my education subchart. Being in the 8th house means that my university education, let's just skip through this here. And by the way, I am not a fan of sharing personal horoscopes, but this was for a very close group of students, and I guess you guys are a sort of close group of students. Here is a horoscope with D24, and there is that Jupiter in the 8th house. Well, you can bet that my classical education didn't go, I mean, my normal university education did not go well during this period. But it did open me up to different opportunities. Anyway, Jyotishis really should not share their own charts. I'm sharing it with you because you guys we are sort of like a family here, and at least I'd like to think so. So let's say you have a 10-year-old child and you can see that it's all 8th house for them. What do you tell the parents? Well, you have a deep insight into that person's education that can maybe spare the parents a lot of pain and suffering and money. You know, we want to send him to Harvard or Cambridge. Right, Cambridge it is. Well, Cambridge isn't cheap. And maybe all that person wants to do is study yoga or Ayurveda. And you can communicate that to the parents by just looking at their education subchart and so forth. So what I'd like to do is look a little bit deeper now into the Navamsha, the D9. And to do that, let's go back and look at a chart here. So with respect to the main chart, the Navamsha, because it's the D9 division, and the number 9 is a very sacred holy number in Vedic tradition, it's the number of completion. It's the number of things coming to fruition. It's the end, the fulfillment. And in a sense, the D9, that's how the 9th division, we call it the D9. This would be the D1, the first division. The D9 or the Navamsha represents the fulfillment of the horoscope. When it comes to sports astrology and contest charts, this is when it applies, meaning when planets activate the D9, this is the most important indicator for success or failure that I've seen in a horoscope. More than anything that happens in the D1, it's the D9 that helps predict when it applies. Now, it doesn't always apply. In fact, most of the time, you won't see it activated. And I'll teach you guys how to see that in the main course. But when planets activate the D9, it's a very powerful indicator for success or failure for a team. Because it represents fulfillment, the fulfillment of the promise that is the main chart. And likewise, when you read a chart for a person and you see, let's see what we see here, and you see a planet, let's say it's the moon, and you want to figure out what that planet's final indications are, you can go into the Navamsha to really figure out what that planet truly promises. And one of the ways to do that is, in fact, we saw this earlier with a class earlier. So let's say this person in this chart is running a period of Saturn. And let me just change something here. There we go. So let's say this person is running a period of Saturn. And you're tasked as an astrologer to help predict for them whether their Saturn period will be good, strong, or medium, or difficult. Now, some astrologers may say, well, it is a Libra ascendant, and if this doesn't make sense yet, just follow along and I'll explain. Therefore, Saturn rules the 4th house and the 5th house because there's Capricorn and Aquarius. As a result, Saturn rules 2 very yoga-forming houses. And thus Saturn is called a yoga karaka. This is a term I'll put in the chat, means that by himself Saturn becomes a success-producing planet. So you're looking at this chart and saying, well, Saturn rules 2 very good houses. Things should go great for you. But is that really the case? So one way to test if a planet will give good results is to look at the D9. What is that planet doing in the D9, in the Navamsha? And so if we find Saturn, here is our Saturn. And let me make this a little more clear by taking out the degrees. There's our Saturn. So those of you who know a little bit of Jyotish, or who have seen the last class and understood and have memorized some of these strengths and weaknesses, first of all, is Saturn strong? Meaning, is it in its own sign? Is it exalted? Does it have Digbala? Is it retrograde? We haven't talked about Digbala yet, but does Saturn have some strength in the main chart? And feel free to just chime in or chat. Okay, so we have one response. No, and that's absolutely true. Saturn has no special dignity. It's not aspected by any planet. It's not exalted. It's not debilitated either. So Saturn is just kind of sitting there in limbo. But wait, it's the Yoga Karaka. It rules 2 good houses. It must surely give something. Well, in that case, look for verification. Now look at Saturn in the D9. What do you notice about Saturn in the D9? Is Saturn strong by being in its own sign or exalted? Or is Saturn weak by being debilitated? Does anyone notice a source of strength or weakness for the planet Saturn in this chart? Yeah, Elliot, in fact, it is very correctly, Elliot points out that it's debilitated. Not only is it debilitated, it's debilitated in a negative house. But mostly it is debilitated. So the fruits that this Saturn can offer are limited. When a planet is debilitated, it is the case, like Shakespeare says, or I think it's Shakespeare, the world is too much with us. Meaning the world weighs heavy on such a person. I have debilitated planets. I can tell you from my own experience that when you run or when you have a debilitated planet, you feel the world the world besets you. You are at the mercy of the world more than the world being at the mercy of you. When you have an exalted planet, it's you who affects the world. Look out, everyone, here I come. But a debilitated planet is weak because it doesn't have the resources, the strength to digest everything that the world is throwing at it. And so people with debilitated planets tend to be more sensitive. They are more at the affect of the world. And so we have artists, comedians, we have sensitive people, spiritual people also can have debilitated planets because you feel things more profoundly. The world affects you more profoundly. So here is a case of a person running Saturn, and in the Navamsha, that Saturn is very poorly placed. It's debilitated.
Hi,
Yes.
Simon.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question? Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, yes.
Hi, my name is Natalia. What if the Saturn in your own chart is like not strong, not in your own sign, not weak, but in your additional chart it's strong. It's in its own sign. What does that mean?
So you mean in the D9 specifically, or in another divisional chart?
Yes, in D9.
In
Yes,
the D9. So
it's
in
in
the
its own sign, for example.
yeah, so it means that then when you run that Saturn period, things may begin. Things may begin average or slowly, but then the D9 shows the real fruit of the results. So by the end of that period, you will produce strong, powerful results. Saturn, rather, will produce strong, powerful results for you, depending on the house
So
it sits in that subchart.
okay, so it will give me result in 19 years.
No, no, no. So you can also run a Saturn subperiod. So look at, for example, on this here, Moon Saturn for this chart, for example, is between November 2018 and June 2020. So during that little Saturn subperiod, in the case of this chart, there will be problems because it's debilitated. But if it were your chart during the Saturn sub period, you will experience good results. But if it's the Saturn main period, yeah, so your Saturn for the first year or two may start out slow, and then it it should produce more and more desirable results as you move forward. Of course, we have to look at the entire chart, right? We can't, I'm isolating things now in order to teach the principle, but when it comes to interpretation, you put everything back where it in place before you interpret. Makes
Okay,
sense.
so
But the short answer is yes, that is a good Saturn. It's a good strengthening to that Saturn.
okay, but it's during this Saturn period only, not in throughout the whole life, right?
Well, yeah, because it's during the Saturn period that you will experience the results of that Saturn in its own house. The rest of the time, it's mainly in the background.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And just to verify why is Saturn debilitated, it is because it sits in Aries. And in the last class, we talked about the exaltation and debilitation of the planets. And just to very quickly just go back to that, I'm going to show you something here. Yeah, so it's specific. It's not because it's in the sign of Mars, because Saturn in Scorpio, while it's not super happy, it's not debilitated in Scorpio. But Saturn in Aries specifically is debilitated. And the reason is, as we discussed in the last class, is because Saturn does not do well on the battlefield, and Aries is the battlefield. And I just wanted to show you this slide here from that presentation, if it comes up. So this is something you just have to memorize. The good thing is, once you know a planet's debilitation, the opposite sign is the exaltation. So you only have to learn one. And so, for example, going back to the chart, Saturn, while it's debilitated in Aries, will be exalted in the sign opposite. And that's true for every planet. Sun, which is debilitated in Libra, will be exalted in Aries. Moon, which is exalted in Taurus, will be debilitated in Scorpio. So if these all sound foreign to you, just watch the last class where I do cover I cover that in depth. And it's just a question of memorization. You just kind of have to get it, memorize it. But it doesn't look like this is going to load it. Oh, there we go. So here is that presentation. So Aries represents the battlefield. And there's supposed to be a picture here. And it's owned by Mars, the general. The planet that's exalted there is the sun, because the sun is the king. And when the king goes into battle, he gains land, he gains property, he gains treasure. So the sun is exalted there, and the planet that's debilitated is Saturn, the butler, who's doesn't the servant. He's not well disposed to being on the battlefield. So anyway, and we go through each one of these signs in this way in the class with full explanation of why that's the case. Nobody is exalted in the library, and so on. So I'll let you check that out on your own. So now let's go back to this chart. So yes, so this Saturn, if the client came to you, you would say you would have to give them some remedial measures or some counseling on mitigating their expectations. All right, so that's one use of the D9, which is to test to see if a planet will truly give results. One of the placements for planets, one of the ways that a planet can be strengthened is if it occupies the same sign in the main chart as it does in the D9. For example, actually, is there an example here of a planet that occupies the same sign in the main chart? So look at this Jupiter. Yes, we do. We have Jupiter in the sign Virgo. Look at it in the D9. Jupiter in the sign Virgo. This is called Varga Uttama or Vargotama. Not because it's in Virgo. It's not Vargotama, meaning being in Virgo. Vargotama is a term, let me write this down, which means the best division. It's a source of strength that a planet gets by occupying the same sign in the D9 as it does in the D1. Now, this Jupiter is already strong by virtue of being retrograde. When a planet is retrograde, it is closest to the Earth and hence brightest in the sky. So this planet Jupiter now is not only retrograde, but it happens to be Vargotama. This is a fancy Sanskrit term that means it's in the same sign in the D9 as it is in the D1. So this tells us that this Jupiter is particularly juicy. Juicy to produce results in this person's life. Are there any other planets in this chart that are Vargotama? Do we notice any others? No, I don't think so. So you can see that this is a fairly rare phenomenon to find a planet in the same sign in the D1 as it is in the D9. So this is a second use of the Navamsha. It's a second way to qualify strength of a planet. Now, we will not be using this in winning with Vedic astrology. We will simply be using the Navamsha in a very specific way to find out if a planet activates the favored or the underdog house, and if so, does it indicate victory or defeat? But at this point, I want to teach you some of the uses of the Navamsha. The final and perhaps the most widely used or the most useful quality of the Navamsha is that it does relate to relationships, and everybody asks about relationships. Single people, married people, young people, old people, everyone wants to know, what's my relationships? Will they improve? Will they get worse? Will I ever find my soulmate? Am I with my soulmate? If I am, when will they realize they're my soulmate? I mean, there's always questions about relationships. So the Navamsha, as a result, is the subchart we want to consult. when it comes to relationships. So let's take a look here. And if I'm moving too fast, please stop me or please forgive me, but I want to stretch you guys a little bit here and just give you some of the basic rules for interpreting the subcharts, which are that a planet generally that sits in a positive house produces positive results during its period. The positive houses are every house except 3, 6, 8, or 12. Now, these are rules that were put down by an astrologer named Iyer, Sheshadri Iyer. But these are sort of basically extrapolated from his system, but also that work in general. So if you have a planet in a positive house in the subchart, it will produce positive results for that matter. Let's go there. So our friend running Saturn, asks us about relationships. We've looked at Saturn in the main chart, which is kind of so-so. It's sitting in the 3rd house, doesn't really activate relationships. To see how Saturn is going to fare during its period, we will look at the relationship subchart, the D9. And there is Saturn again, debilitated, but in addition, he happens to be in what? Which house is Saturn sitting in the D9? He's in the 6th house. And the 6th house is one of the quote-unquote bad or evil houses, meaning that it will produce undesirable results relative to relationships. So now we're switching gears and looking at the D9 from the perspective of relationships. What about when this person rules moon, runs a moon period, whether it's a sub-period or a major period? Looking at their main chart, does the moon in any way really have anything to do with relationships in the main chart? Meaning, is it activating the 7th house of partnership, or perhaps activating the 5th house of a lover or a paramour or a date?
In the Navamsha it is. It's exalted in Taurus.
Yes, so there we go. But in the main chart, so from the main chart, if the person asked you, hey, how is my moon period going to go for relationships? You'd be hard pressed to say anything, wouldn't you? Well, it's in Shravana, and Shravana people have a hard time figuring out their relationships. They feel like they're from another planet, and if they're men, they can't relate to the women. If they're women, they can't relate to the men. But that's a general statement. But the moon here isn't really giving us a lot of clues. But very correctly, you pointed out, look at the moon in the D9. It is not only in the 7th house, it is exalted. When a planet is exalted, it gives profuse, it gives excess. So the person may, in their moon period, may have a lot of interest. Like people may come out and ask them out. They may have a lot of dates. A lot of stuff is going on in the area of relationships in an exalted way. So here the D9 is giving us a clue that yes, in the moon period, you will have many partners perhaps to choose from. In addition, it's aspected by Jupiter. So this should be a fairly positive experience for relationships during the moon period. All other factors being equal. Yes, it's also aspected by Mars. Yes?
Can I ask a question in relationship to that person with the Saturn, before?
Mm-hmm.
In a Navamsha, if that person is going through a Saturn period, because it's in a 6th house and it's in Aries, and if you look at the birth chart, Aries is actually the relationship, rules the 7th house in a way. Mars does. So could that person during that Saturn period expect surgery to the head because the 6th house is like ill health or some accident with the health, passive aggressive from the partner, as well as perhaps problems with authority, debt. Can you look at it but from the partner's point of view? Because in the first chart, the natal chart, Aries, Mars is the ruler of the 7th.
Well,
does that make sense? I'm probably not very clear. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So I'm hearing a couple of things. One of them is, can you read the D9, the Navamsha, in general as kind of like you read the birth chart, and in the sense now this person has Saturn in the 6th house. Yes, some astrologers do read the Navamsha like a birth chart. Do I do that? Not necessarily. I like to keep the Navamsha specific to, in this case, relationships. And also the second use is as a qualifier of the strength of the planet. However, there are Jyotishis who specialize in using the Navamsha as a horoscope in and of itself to give us insight. So, so my answer is yes and no. I don't use it that way, but yes. So can you predict relationship problems? There, absolutely. Look, Saturn is not well placed in either the main chart or the subchart. He happens to be at around 2-3 degrees Mula. This is by the way, this is basically now, or this is yesterday's Prashna. This is the galactic center. This is what the Mayans, right around 3 to 6 degrees of Sagittarius, is what the Mayans used to call Xibalba, the cosmic rift, because it represents the black hole at the center of our galaxy. Anyone running Saturn at this point is experiencing the black hole at the center of the galaxy, or that alignment. So there is tension, there can be trauma. Matt, are you there? Are you with us? So understanding these, yeah. So there is information in the chart that's not always apparent from, all of these graphs. But if you know that the galactic center in the nakshatra Mula is between 3 to 6 degrees roughly of Sagittarius, then any planet there is going to have a sense of like, you feel like Dante about to enter the inferno, like you're going through the underworld, like you have access to forces beyond comprehension. It can be a good thing, but how does that bode for relationships? Well, you may be experiencing passion that you don't know how to channel. You may be experiencing anger that you don't know how to channel. It's especially when the relationship chart is also put Saturn in a negative house, debilitated. So this would be a case of maybe lawsuits, yes, because it's the 6th house. Certainly relationship problems. Could there be surgeries? Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I do encourage the use of the D9 that way, but make sure you fully understand how to use it in the D1 before you switch to the D9. That's why I limit it simply to relationships and testing the strength of the planet. But could there be surgery to the head? Yes. Aries represents the head. Saturn is the planet of accident. So yeah, I would say that's accurate. And even to the ears, trauma to the ears could be possible because it sits in the 3rd house of the chart. So yeah, so we're diving into interpretation, which is, I led you here by sort of encouraging this, but now I want to sort of lead you back and suggest go back to these basic techniques. So let's go back to this. Generally, a planet will give positive results if it's anywhere except 3, 6, 8, or 12. And we saw that Saturn was in 6, but the moon was not. So we can expect great, or certainly much more positive results for that person's moon when they run the moon period. Then a planet in a negative house produces negative or undesirable results during its period. The negative houses are 3, 6, 8, and 12. More specifically, the 3rd and the 8th indicate the death of the matter. So if a person has a planet in the 3rd or the 8th house of a subchart, now here it's the Navamsha. So here we have Sun in the 3rd house and Rahu in the 8th house. So when this person, again, I'm referencing this specifically to the planetary period. When they run a Sun period or a Rahu period, whether it's a sub or the main, they may experience the quote-unquote death of the relationship, so a separation. Whether it's it could be a separation. You simply say, hey, I'm going to be in Europe for 6 months, and we'll continue our relationship long distance. Or, hey, we need to see other people, or whatever. There is a separative influence to planets in the 3rd and the 8th house of any subchart. So if we look at the, let's look at the subchart of property. Forget that it says destiny here. So the D4 is the subchart of property. Then during a Mars or a Saturn period, this person will also experience separation from their property, most likely a move, a change of residence. Poor person, man, this Saturn is just not doing well in the subcharts, is it? So bad relationship, moving out of the house, not much luck with vehicles. There's Saturn in the 8th house of vehicles. Yes, it's in its own sign, but so during a Saturn or a Mars period, this person will experience the quote-unquote death or the separation from, in this case, D4 is home. During the Ketu or a sub or a Sun period, the same can be said to be true. Does this make sense, guys? And again, this is predicated on having a proper birth time. Now, if you are running, if this is a prashna, a horary chart, a chart for the moment, then the time is correct. You don't need the time. But if it's a birth chart, you want to make sure you have an accurate birth time before you start predicting stuff. So let's actually change this to right now and see what's happening in the sky right now. Well, interestingly, there's Saturn and Mars right where we had them, Ketu and Sun. So any questions about this so far? Let's go back to presentation. So the 3rd house and the 8th indicate the death of the matter. Now, mind you, the word death is a strong word. It just means the end of the matter. So if it's the subchart of property, again, you may separate from the property. If it's a subchart of a partner, there may be a temporary separation. It doesn't mean the partner dies. Okay, so please don't misunderstand that. The 6th house in a subchart indicates some obstacles, health problems, difficulties that lead to problems with that subchart. So again, coming back here, let's find a planet in the 6th house of a subchart. So here we go. Look at the D12. The D12 talks about your parents. So when you run a period of Ketu, when you run in your chart, let's say this is your chart, then your parents one of your parents may in fact suffer some health problems or obstacles, because in the subchart of parents, that Ketu is in a negative house. All right. And I know I'm teaching subcharts before we've really mastered the basics of Vedic astrology, but again, I just want to show you what's possible, and I also want to introduce the subcharts because they will factor into the Winning with Vedic Astrology class, particularly the D9. That's the only subchart we use. Finally, the 12th house in a subchart indicates loss or separation. So here is, let's go back to the relationship chart, the D9. And we have a planet in the 12th house. Now, there is a special sort of condition when two planets are on either side. In this case, we have Mercury and Jupiter that will modify this. But generally speaking, when this person runs Jupiter, there may be a loss or separation from the partner due to distance, due to 12th house meanings. And in this case, it's quite mitigated because there's another benefic here, and this forms a special yoga. But when two benefics are on either side of the ascendant, it's a special yoga. But typically, a planet in the 12th will create distance and separation as well. So 3, 6, 8, and 12 are the bad houses in the subcharts. The other houses are positive. That's a very simple rule. And again, sort of a shortcut way to read the subcharts. So, yeah, so this is the essence of what I wanted to share today. And again, just especially with respect to the Navamsha and how it represents the ultimate potential of the horoscope. So if you've been struggling to find anything good in your main chart, take heart, because particularly after midlife, the Navamsha, many Jyotishis agree, takes over. And if you have a really good Navamsha, then even if you have a terrible chart, main chart, your life should go well. Of course, the opposite is also true. If your Navamsha is not very strong, then the fruits, you may have some trouble getting fruits from the tree, even though your tree may be very sound. Okay. So this is basically what I wanted to cover today. Today's class is a short review, but mainly introducing the topic of subcharts. What I will do is I do have handouts for today that I will put up with this class, and you can download them, showing how to calculate the Navamsha and how to look at it. Any questions? Any questions so far? How many of you have and own either Hard to Foe and Robert Svoboda's Light on Life, or James Kelleher's Path of Light, or both? Aye, aye. Yes, excellent. Now, here is the real question. How many of you have actually been reading them? Not yet. Slowly but surely. Okay, good. Slowly but surely is good. Twice over the years. Excellent. And I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but Light on Life, yes. So for a deeper explanation, okay, only Hard to Fill many times, not okay. Well, good. I'm glad that having these classes will help shed light on the books. But the textbooks are essential, right? Just like in college, you can go to class and just listen, which is what I did, but don't do what I did. And, learn some, but you get the most when you actually read the textbooks and go to class. All right. So here's a question that's come up. How do you determine if a planet is retrograde? It's a good question. So the short answer is that when a planet in a chart, for the outside planets, meaning the outer planets, meaning planets in the solar system that are beyond the Earth. So if you know the order of the planets in the solar system, Mercury is the closest to the sun, then it's Venus, then Earth. So Mercury and Venus are the inner planets, then everything else is the outer. So Mars is the planet beyond the Earth, then Jupiter, and then Saturn. These are the outer planets. Of course, the moon is our moon, and Rahu, Ketu are mathematical points. So for the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, when you look at a horoscope, and they are on the opposite part of the chart of the sun, they are opposite the sun, then they will be retrograde. So you can see here Jupiter has an R next to it, means it's retrograde. Notice how far from the sun it is. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 houses away. So if a planet is especially 6, 7, or 8 houses away, but sometimes even 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 houses away from the sun, it will be retrograde. In the reality of the solar system, retrograde outer planets, notice that Saturn, an outer planet, is not retrograde because it's close to the sun. You see that? Nor is Mars. See, Mars is so close to the sun. The outer planets, when retrograde, are are in fact closest to the Earth. And so they are closest to the Earth and farthest from, they're closest to the Earth. When they are farthest from the Earth, they will be represented in the chart here as closest to the sun. So right now, Mars and Saturn are farther away from the planet Earth than Jupiter is, because they're close to the sun. When Mars and Saturn are too close to the sun, they become, when any planet is too close to the sun, it becomes combust. And that's when it's hardest to see that planet, and that planet's influence is the least it'll be in our chart, okay? That planet's influence is minimized in our chart, or it becomes troubled. Mercury here is about to become combust soon. In fact, it's already within 8 degrees of the sun, so it's already combust. It's about to be seriously combust. See, sun is at 12, Mercury is at 4. That's a 8-degree difference. So in a few days, it'll become more and more combust. So that's how you tell retrograde planets. But of course, in a software, it'll just say R next to it. I think that was your question, yeah? So if you have those books, please do read the chapter on the Navamsha, the subcharts, and in addition to this course. And then if you have questions, of course, you can email me. So part of what I'd like to offer you is this free course, obviously, but if you have specific questions, you can email me and we can do some one-on-one time, particularly if you're going to be in the Winning with Vedic Astrology course, in which case you get sessions with me privately so we can discuss any questions you have. All right. So thank you guys. Today's class is short. I will send you an invite for next week's class, the last of the intro classes. In the meantime, please continue to read. The previous assignments were to read about the planets in Path of Light and about the houses in Path of Light or Light on Life. You can now optionally read about the Navamsha if you like, and we'll see you in next week's class. class. All right. So thank you, everybody. I know we didn't go for a marathon session today, but these principles of using the Navamsha are very powerful. So I want you to just start putting them into practice as a student. Don't start making dire predictions if you see something, because there's always something else that we haven't studied that can be that can shed light, right? But start using this stuff, and we'll meet next week. All right, everybody. Thank you, and yeah, hope to see you next time. Namaskar. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. See you next time.